Hello, everybody. Today we have a special episode that is beyond our rounds that we're going through. Today we are joined by Gregg from Popular History. Would you like to introduce yourself further, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I'm Gregg from Popular History. A lot of more general Rexipod fans will recognize me as Gregg who edits Pontifex. Um,
Good.
although I also do have my own little Rexipod, Cardinal Numbers. So I say little in the sense of it's a listener base, which has been expanding for reasons, not in terms of the scale of the project, because I'll be ranking all of the cardinals of the Catholic Church from the catacombs to kingdom come. So that's been going off and on for a few years. I do have 5 kids, so I get hiatused often enough. But yeah, I thought it would be fun, and you thought it would be fun to just kind of get together and talk about some stuff, some of the things that's been going on. So, what are we talking about today?
Right, yeah. So today's given the theme of elections going on and trying to see how religious bodies
Hmm.
choose who's going to be in charge next.
Religious elections in particular, for sure.
Exactly. Well, I thought it would be interesting to offer a parallel to, for example, how the early Caliphate changed its elections and how caliphs became chosen and how that eventually evolved into something different. And I'd also be curious on your input on like why the papacy
Hmm.
didn't do that in
Yeah.
in its own way.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good. Let's get into it.
Yeah, so for the succession to the caliphate, we need to start from the beginning to figure out, why do we need a succession? Who exactly are we succeeding, and what's the point of this all?
Hmm.
Well, the thing is that the caliphate is essentially a succession to the Prophet Muhammad, who he himself did not have any male children that survived into adulthood. So, well, the line of succession, there was no clear, Salic line of succession,
Okay.
as you'd
Yeah.
expect it
Yeah.
typically. And so everybody had to kind of figure out what are we doing now with this new religion and what's going on.
Yeah. Can I ask you a quick early
Yeah,
question?
please.
Was there any because he was married, right, Muhammad, like
He
several
was
times?
married, and he had several daughters who lived into adulthood. I mean,
Uh-huh.
they're still living descendants of Muhammad to this day.
Yeah. I was just wondering if there was any I assume it was all very respectful, but anyone kind of being like, huh, I wonder why, Allah didn't permit him to have a son, or was there anything like questioning that?
That I know of, not really. I think it's just sort of how the world played out. That's just sort of
Yeah.
what happens, and the general acceptance is that he sort of had other people who served as his spiritual sons,
Yeah.
and well, that made it fine. And
Yeah.
one important figure that we're going to talk about is Ali, who is the son-in-law of Muhammad and also his cousin and
Okay.
also his adoptive brother and also his adoptive son. There's a lot of
Okay. That
connections
sounds
in there.
vaguely Habsburg.
Yes, very very much so.
Okay, but yeah, sort of like a practical view of it. It wasn't like a catastrophe. Like you're not
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Henry VIII running around trying to
No,
find
no,
a
no,
male heir.
definitely not.
It
No, no,
was it was
exactly.
fine.
Mostly because it's kind of one of the things they're struggling with is trying to understand what is the caliphate really. Because
Mm.
one of the problems at the start, just when Muhammad had died, is that everybody was sort of unclear on what was going to happen. Like, was this just a one-time thing when the prophet was alive and now we just go our separate ways and that's it?
Mm.
That's the end of the
Hmm.
religion? Or no, actually, this is meant to continue. This is a project that has to keep going.
Yeah, it almost seems like, if they had taken that first approach, Muhammad was a special one-off thing, it almost seems like it'd be more of like a reformation sort of thing than like a new religion. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like somebody elected a successor to Martin Luther at some point and said, yeah, let's go that way. It was just, no, now everybody does their own thing. And we have some guidelines, but that's as far as we're going.
Yeah, and you could see how that would end up differently one way versus the other.
Yeah, exactly. Very interesting alternate history, but yeah. And so, yeah, so what happens with Islam is that at the very start of it, there is this centrifugal force of, oh, maybe we should just go all our separate ways. And so in Medina, there is this big discussion among a group of different people. And eventually, a man called Abu Bakr, one of the closest companions of Muhammad, one of the first Muslim men, he essentially tells everybody to get their crap together and no, we're actually doing this. We should all be together. Everything should be stable and organized.
Mm-hmm.
And then another fellow, a man called Umar, says, hey, you make a good point. Maybe you should be caliph. Maybe you should be the successor to the prophet.
It's interesting that it's like that credential as one of the first Muslim men. Like,
yeah.
But I guess that is the time period we're looking at. Like, these are Muhammad's very earliest followers, and perhaps the earlier you're on, the better.
Yeah, all of these people are the first caliphs, the Rashidun caliphs, as they're called, the rightly guided ones, they're basically the Muslim equivalent of the apostles.
Are we talking like first 2 or 3 or first, 100?
It's the first dozen.
Yeah.
So
really very much like the apostles.
Yeah, exactly. And there are 10 people who, according to Sunni tradition, not Shia, but according to Sunni tradition, all these 10 people were personally promised paradise by the prophet. And so, they're especially impressive and especially
so like already canonized when alive.
Yeah, exactly. So they are very ready for all.
And I hear it's always Sunni in Philadelphia.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I did see a wonderful spoof of that on YouTube at some point, so that was excellent.
Nice. We'll have to link that.
Yes. So the fact is, Abu Bakr, now caliph, brilliant. He was sort of elected by everybody in Medina who thought, yeah, you make a good point. That's fair enough. But as I mentioned before, the problem is that Ali, who was, as I mentioned, extremely tightly related to Muhammad, and according to certain traditions, he was the first Muslim man. So
I'm picturing Aladdin, like the Prince Ali bit where he, kind of triumphantly joins in.
That's why it's a popular name. He's a very
fair enough.
Very popular fellow.
Yes.
But yeah, so the fact is that why wasn't he at this meeting? Well, he was doing the pious thing and preparing his prophet's body for burial.
Oh, okay,
which, is an important job. But since he was so tightly related to the prophet, there is a party of people who believe that he was probably meant to succeed.
Yeah, so like, hey, sorry I couldn't make the conclave. I was holding the Pope's funeral.
Yeah, exactly. I was literally burying the Pope. It's like, okay, maybe you should have waited.
Maybe that was a good pass.
Yeah, exactly. And so, there's also a separate thing I'll just very quickly go into because it's thorny. But the fact is that there is generally an incident towards the end of Muhammad's life where he pointed in public to Ali, who was with him, and said to the assembled crowd, so for all of you that consider me your Mawla, you should also consider Ali your Mawla. Why do I use the Arabic word?
I was going to say,
because it's very contentious. Because Mawla could mean multiple things. According to the Sunnis, it means, if you mean you're an ally, a person worthy of respect. And so what Muhammad is saying, if you respect me, you should also respect Ali because he's a cool dude. Brilliant. According to the Shias, they're using a different assertion of the word Mawla, which means leader. And so according to Shia sources, this is the prophet actually appointing Ali as his successor. But apparently, due to shenanigans going on in Medina at the time, this succession plan wasn't followed through with, and so actually, no, the first caliphs are actually illegitimate according to these traditions.
I see. Shenanigans going on in religious documentation of splits.
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine that.
That would never happen at all, of course. It's a wild concept. But so what happens is that the caliphate goes on with Abu Bakr. He is the caliph. He actually goes and talks with Ali, and they sort of have a discussion which, again, depending on the different sources, is more or less threatening.
Yeah, a frank and open exchange of views.
Yeah, according to Sunni sources, Abu Bakr just asked Ali, hey, listen, the caliphate was going to break apart. I did what I had to do. I'm sure you understand. We don't want our prophet's work to be lost. And Ali's like, no, I totally understand. I would have liked to be there, but these things happen. It's fine. According to Shia sources, a bunch of armed men break into Ali's house and beat his wife savagely, and Ali says, "Okay, stop, stop. I'll do whatever. Just stop hurting my family." And
I
then
can
Abu
see how
Bakr
those
says,
describe
"Yeah, that's
exactly
fine."
the same event for sure.
Exactly. Also, for added context, Ali's wife is the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad.
Right.
So, you
Now,
know,
just for curiosity, because I know one of
yes.
the daughters of the Prophet Muhammad becomes a well-known name within Catholicism. Is this Fatima?
I need to double check really, really quick. I don't
Yeah.
think it is. I think Fatima
Okay.
is younger, but let me
Yeah.
just have
It's
have
just
a
interesting
quick look.
that kind of people like to sometimes point out that little tie-in there just culturally.
Yes, it is interesting. Do you know how Fatima gets into
So
Christian?
basically it's the name of a place, right? And ultimately, like, there was some famous Marian apparitions there.
Yes.
So, it would have been during Al Andalus or somewhere in that
Hmm.
time frame that it picked up the name. And then, it kind of ran with the name once that became a pilgrimage site after the apparitions, which, Catholics are not obliged to believe in any particular apparitions, but Fatima, if you believe in any, that's got to be right up there. And surprisingly, that's a 20th century one, believe it or not.
Yeah, I heard it as a recent thing. I just didn't know it was connected to this Fatima. But
Yes,
okay, cool,
yes.
brilliant. But yeah, I have checked. Yes, this is Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad, who
Oh,
is
it is.
the mother of
Yeah,
Hussein and
yeah. Okay,
Hassan.
so yeah, so basically, I'm getting riled up now just thinking about them basically beating up Our Lady is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly. That's why the Shias are very
I,
unhappy with
I,
these
I was
early
gonna say, I
caliphs.
think I'm Team Shia, right? Or is that team? Which team does that put me on?
Shia literally means the party because they're the party of Ali. So Sunni is
Okay,
more of like a general one. But yeah,
okay,
so you
yeah.
know, it's a matter of faith which of the
Oh,
two options you believe, but you know,
well, I think
go with your
Catholicism
favorite.
is probably neither of those options.
Yeah, I think Catholicism is like probably has its
But you
own
told me one of them
separate canon.
has or is a party, and I like parties, so I'll do
Yeah,
the
there we
party
go.
one. I got my party hat on. I'm sure this will be fun. Where's the punch
Yeah,
bowl?
good stuff. So yeah, so what happens is that Ali ends up saying retiring to sort of private life. He continues compiling the Quran because he was one of the scribes that wrote it
Hmm.
down. So cool, he's working on that. And Abu Bakr, the first caliph, his main job is reunifying the Arabia because basically a bunch of people are saying, no, I'm the last prophet. There's even like a woman who claims to be a prophetess,
Mm.
and so everything is splintering. So Abu
Yeah,
Bakr spends
things are
the
bad
first.
when the women are talking.
Yeah, exactly. It's terrifying. Imagine if Mary Magdalene had suddenly decided at some point, no, I'm actually the daughter of God, and that would have been a whole separate vibe.
A whole series of novels, as I
Yeah,
understand it.
exactly. Exactly.
To be clear, guys, that was sarcasm. I don't.
Yes, of course.
Yes, just in case you're not familiar with my show, I do that.
Yes. But yeah, so Abu Bakr spends 2 years reunifying Arabia, and then eventually he feels a bit poorly and he appoints Umar as second caliph. Umar, another one of these 10 men who were promised paradise. So brilliant.
Okay.
He's caliph.
Yeah.
Awesome. Umar does the terrifying thing for everyone outside of Arabia, which is massively expand the caliphate.
Oh, yeah.
He basically takes over Mesopotamia, takes over Syria and Palestine and parts of Egypt at the start. He begins working that
Yeah.
bit over there.
So he's like
So
Alexandering, he's Napoleoning.
yeah, exactly. He's the one under which there's the Battle of Yarmouk, the Battle of Qadisiyah. He is the one that turns this from a regional religion into, oh no, we're basically destroying Zoroastrianism and giving a serious beating to the Romans.
Yes.
So he does very well for himself, but the problems start when one fine day he is in a mosque and he is stabbed by a former Sassanid slave.
Oh.
And that leaves a problem for the succession because what are we doing? The previous guy had appointed him, but like there's still not much of a precedent so far.
Hmm.
So it's mostly consensus is the precedent, but that's as far as it goes.
Yeah, and you could hard how to get consensus right after that.
Yeah, exactly. And the good thing is that, or rather, the relatively good thing for Umar is that he survives long enough to appoint again the survivors of this group of 10 men, these Sahaba, these companions of the Prophet, and tells them, listen, I'm kind of delirious from pain, but I trust you to choose who the next caliph is. Choose somebody among you. I'm sure you'll make the right choice. Cough, cough. He dies. And so, yeah, now it's election time. It is basically a conclave with the apostles in it.
Yeah, okay.
So all of them get together and they try to decide who should be caliph, who's going to be in charge.
Ali.
Yes, and well, there are two final candidates. There are two final califabili, if you want to put it that way.
Okay. Prince Ali.
Yes,
Ali,
one
Ali.
is exactly Ali because, well, he is extremely closely related. He was probably gonna succeed in the first place, but whole funeral thing wasn't there. And another guy is Uthman. Uthman is essentially the rich guy of this group of people. He basically funded Islam when it started. He was a really rich merchant, and again, one of the first dozen Muslim men, but he is sort of less closely related to it.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to start saying, make Islam great again, but you mentioned he was, on the ground floor, so that's a bit different.
Yeah, exactly. He was all right. He got in when it was difficult. He didn't get in when it was easy.
Yeah, gotcha.
And so, well, they go into full job interview mode, and they ask say the same question. They say, okay, listen. They go to Ali first, and they say, hey, as long as you'll follow the example of the first two caliphs and the example of the Prophet, you can be caliph. It'll be cool. Ali says,
Precedent.
Yeah. Ali says, I'll definitely respect the Prophet and the Quran. I'm all the way there. I'll love the Prophet.
Yeah.
But
so what I'm not hearing.
Yeah. I'm not really up for the precedent of the previous caliph. I'm my own man. Also, kind of disagreed with some of their policies, so I'll do my own thing. Problem is, the committee then turns to Uthman and says, well, how about you? Do you promise to follow the Prophet, the Quran, and the previous caliphs? And Uthman says, yep, absolutely.
Yes, committee, I will do what you want when the other guy won't. Let's see how this goes.
And the committee says, okay, Uthman, congratulations, you're the third caliph. Hooray.
I wish my job interviews went like that.
Yeah, it's great. Just have somebody before you, just to see what they've said. So like, oh no, I'll take
Watch
one
the
less
trap
vacation
door in the
day.
floor.
It'll be great. Yeah. And so Ali, to his credit, just he's miffed, but he says, all right, fine. I don't want to cause any strife.
And that's why we call him Fabulous He. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He's great. He's doing amazing things. And so at this point, Uthman rules the caliphate. He extends it. He conquers all of Iran. Egypt is under control. Brilliant. All great. But this is when there start to grow some tensions between different groups because we need to decide how the spoils are spread out in the empire and who is really meant to be in charge. Because the problem is that Uthman starts appointing a lot of his family members, the Umayyads, to important roles in government. And that starts to rub people the wrong way. That's right, yes. From their great-grandfather Umayya.
Yeah, the part.
It's a big family, yes. And so Uthman appoints these people, and this starts to cause grumbling in the provinces. So much so that there are a bunch of people that go all the way to Medina, and they go to petition the caliph and say, hey, listen, you should really stop appointing your family members as governors, appoint qualified people such as us who are complaining to you, yada, yada, let's go. Things eventually get so bad that there is a siege of Uthman's house.
Oh, like his personal house.
Start to threaten him. Yes, exactly. It's not good. And the protesters, these rebels, actually go up to Ali and say, hey, listen, if you want the caliphate, you can have it. We'll give it to you. We'll just dethrone Uthman and you'll be in charge. It's fine. But the fact is that Ali is too good for this sinful earth. And he says, no, I'm not. I don't want to get it. Not like this. Like, if it's going to be a regular election, sure, I'm happy to do the job. But you should probably not threaten the caliph.
Don't want to look like a usurper.
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine what Persian history would look like if there were usurpers.
I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about. There would be no such thing, honestly. And, well, yeah, so what happens is eventually things get out of hand. The rioters storm into Uthman's house and kill him over a Quran while he was reading it. It's very symbolic, it's very
Oof.
intense. And in the end, there is sort of a committee of people in Medina, among which are the murderers of Uthman, sort of
Oh,
problematically,
yeah.
that elects Ali. And Ali, you're caliph. Hooray. Congratulations.
Woo. Ignore the bloody Quran over there.
Exactly. Someone who won't ignore the bloody Quran is a man called Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, who is a cousin of Uthman and was the governor of Syria at the time. And Muawiyah, he is taking charge on himself of essentially avenging Uthman and saying,
Mm.
no, you can't just kill a caliph. We want to have the assassins brought to justice, as one would.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Were assassins a thing at this point? Just,
Not yet. No, the
just
assassins are
yeah.
like
Okay,
in the early thousands, I think,
okay. Yeah, I knew
broadly.
they were like sort of this general like somewhere in the Islamic world. So I was just curious.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's just like just pre-Crusades. I think that's roughly when they're founded.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. These are just regular garden variety murderer
yeah. Regular, yeah.
Hashashin
Yes,
barbed
there's
brands.
still
Yeah.
assassins, but not
Yes, they're not branded
assassins.
assassins. Yes.
Yes, capital A. And I am so sorry, but I am just picturing like the assassins, like, showing up because you tried to take their capital A and they're going to defend their property rights. And they show up with a lawyer and it's just completely like a legal argument and absolutely no like threat of force. Like I
No, no,
just
of
love
course.
that picture.
I mean, they're not being paid for it.
Exactly.
They're just
This is
doing
a
this for
legal
the
matter.
love of the game. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, so essentially everything is kind of chaotic now, and we get to the tragedy that is the first fitna, which is the first split, the first turmoil, it's called. Because it's essentially, imagine if the apostles ended up in a civil war with each other. Because right now, all the survivors of these Sahaba, these 10 people who were promised paradise, they all split into different camps
I was
based
gonna say,
on
like,
what
how
they
many
think
of
is the
them are
right
left?
way. I think it's like six or so now
Okay,
by
yeah,
this
'cause
point,
it's been
thereabouts.
it's been a minute.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. There are a few. It's been a few decades that have
I guess they
gone.
probably would have been young to
They're
start
all
with.
relatively
That's
young. I mean,
typically when you
yeah,
adopt the new, religion popping up.
yeah, exactly. I mean, they were all relatively just like half a generation under the prophet, so they were a little bit on the younger end. I mean, Ali especially, he was just 8 when he converted, so fair enough.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And yeah, so things split up terribly. Some of
Mm.
the followers of the prophet, together with his youngest wife Aisha, sort of split off and go to Iraq and essentially stage their own rebellion, saying, "We don't recognize Ali as caliph. He
Mm.
isn't in charge. We need to make our own thing. We'll restart."
Yeah, I feel like if the apostles had like had success and were like, in control of entire like, the equivalents of modern nations,
Hmm.
there would have been a lot more infighting. Um, you know,
Yeah, that would have
but
been
because they did
very
not
dramatic to
succeed
see.
in sort of
Yeah.
that worldly way, at least in their lifetimes, yeah, that's where you get to kind of that church unity being born from. We're too busy, just trying to keep this thing going and trying to not die to fight among each
Yeah,
other.
very much so.
But this is the bloodier what if for
Yes, this
this.
is extremely bloody because oh goodness, all of this is
Yeah.
terrible.
And unfortunately it's not a what if on the Islamic side.
No, exactly not. And so what happens is that all of this, so Ali goes and fights the wife of the prophet and other companions of the prophet, and many of them end up dying. Aisha manages to survive and is sent in retirement over in Mecca. But essentially, what's happening here is that Ali, who was promised paradise by the prophet, is
Mhm.
forced to kill other people who were promised paradise by the prophet,
Oh, that's
which
that's not a good
has
scenario.
theological implications
Yeah,
because
that's some
who is
serious
right? Exactly.
civil war precedent.
Yeah, that is
I guess,
all,
because it is literally a civil war, so fair
yeah,
enough.
very much so, which is very splitting everything on in the
Yeah.
world.
Bad blood. This is
Yeah.
this is the West East Orthodox Catholic split then.
Yes.
just
Yeah,
to
it is kind of, yeah.
aggressively analogize things.
I can see that. Yeah, there is that vibe.
More specifically, it's the cementing of it with the Fourth Crusade, which,
Oh
yeah,
goodness, yeah, yeah,
Catholics
yeah.
were.
That was harsh.
Yeah.
That was
There
not a
was,
good weekend at Constantinople.
yeah, no, there's all sorts of issues that cemented that. So this would be, yeah, definitely something
Mhm.
cementing these divisions.
Yeah. And so, well, what happens is that now Ali needs to face Muawiyah, who is avenging the previous Caliph Uthman, and they come to a battle just outside Syria, and Muawiyah has the clever idea of saying, either clever or merciful, depending on which side you're on, of asking his soldiers to advance with Qurans attached to their spears, saying,
Mm.
no, 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 let's talk this out. Let's just read the Quran and see what it says. I mean, we should just agree this and just we'll make some arbitration and make sure that we're all happy and we can decide who the caliph actually is meant to be. We can decide who's meant to avenge the previous caliph. We'll see what happens.
Mm.
So, okay, Ali agrees, that's fine, but a group of people called the Kharijites think that just by agreeing to negotiate, Ali has abdicated to the caliphate, and so
Oh,
they go and form their own separate splinter version of Islam, where
off.
they're the only true believers and everyone else is heretics and they need
And
to
so
be
this
killed.
is a splinter off from the, it's the Shia, right, that are on the Ali's
Yes.
side?
Yes, that's right. So they decide, no, 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 none of you are legitimate, actually. We're the only true believers. You can all go to hell.
Yeah, so now we're in like the Western Schism, the three popes time sort of thing.
Yes, except with terrorist attacks,
Yeah,
which
and
we'll get
accept
into right
all
now.
of this, like, church history analogies and making, keep in mind this is like a single generation,
Yes, this is all
or at
everybody
least one
has
lifetime.
yeah, everybody has personally known the prophet. Everybody who is here has known him one way or another.
Yeah.
So
Oof,
it's still fresh.
whirlwind.
Yeah. And so essentially, yes, there is an arbitration that is decided upon. The two groups have a chat, but the problem is that Muawiyah pulls a sneaky one here because his representative talks to Ali's representative and they say, okay, you know what? Let's just say everybody puts down their weapons, everybody abandons their positions, and we'll just pick a new caliph. We'll just have a new election, see what happens. Sounds
Yeah.
good? Brilliant.
Yep. Okay. Yep. Church council comes together. Everyone's supposed to resign.
Yeah.
Yes. And in Catholicism, this is what made you get back to one pope. Well, after the
Yes.
first time when they tried it, and it made them end up with three popes instead of two. But the second time they tried it, this is what got you back down to one pope. History
Yes.
is
Second time's a
complicated.
charm.
I think the emperor was more there and glaring the second time.
Yes. No. All of you play nice, please. We need a single pope. But well, this time Muawiyah's representative does a sneaky because he tells Ali's representative, "Okay, no, you go
Sneaky, sneaky.
first." So Ali's representative says, "Okay, yep, on behalf of Ali, I depose him as caliph, and now my friend will say
And I
something."
resign.
And Muawiyah's representative says, "Well, oh well, if the caliphate is vacant, then I propose Muawiyah to be caliph now." It's like, wait, what? This wasn't the plan.
We said
Oh
we'd come
dear.
up with a new caliph. We didn't say who.
Yeah, so it's like, oh no, wait, well, damn. So
That
this
is
is
a
very
sneaky
sneaky.
snick.
And well, the fact is that the Kharijites I mentioned earlier, who believe that everybody is a false
Mm-hmm.
Muslim, they decide to send assassins, small a assassins, to both
Swash.
caliphs. And so the same day, they'll kill them both, and problem solved. Everything will be fine because everyone's dead now, I guess.
That sounds like the fringe religious solution.
Yeah, exactly. This fringe religious group where it's like a dozen of them decides, yeah, you know what, we're the true religion. Let's just kill everybody who's wrong. It'll be fine. I'm sure there will be no consequences.
God will sort them out, famously.
Yeah. And yeah, so the thing is that one of these assassins manages to kill Ali, but Muawiyah is only injured. And he manages to survive, which eventually means that he is the sole caliph. He becomes in
Mm-hmm.
charge of this Umayyad.
Yay! Reunified.
Yes.
We lived happily ever after.
Yes. Problem is, he wasn't really promised paradise, so this is where the Rashidun Caliphate, the rightly
Oh,
guided caliphate, ends. And it's
yeah.
like,
So there's still people
ugh,
promised paradise kicking around.
Yeah, exactly. But now Ali was the last one, or one of the last ones, and well, he dies. I mean, actually, the last guy promised paradise, I think, dies during the siege of Constantinople because he thought he wanted to go out like a badass, which is fair enough.
Okay, yeah. So this is basically, like John, right, the last apostle, for he's kind
Yes.
of still keeping these aggressive and very imprecise analogies. But yes, and to
Yes.
be clear, this would be certainly not the first or last siege of Constantinople.
Oh no, definitely not. This is a lot. There's a lot going on with sieges, plenty of sieges. But yeah, the interesting thing that Muawiyah does is that he sort of transitions the caliphate from a republic to a monarchy.
But I guess that is an indication of just how far they had gone in terms of, like, there's like still seems like there's expansion and so forth going on during all of this, or
Oh
perhaps
yeah,
not
everything
right during
has
this,
been.
but yeah, in any
Yeah,
downtime they can find.
yeah. Any downtown they can find, they've spread over to like Roman Africa. They're all the way on the border with India. They're taking bites out of Anatolia. It's
Mhm.
a whole thing.
Yeah,
The
I have
caliphate.
seen the Umayyad Caliphate in Crusader Kings, and I would not want to
Yes,
mess with it.
exactly. This terrifying object needs to be nerfed. And yeah, so what happens with Muawiyah is that he transforms it into a monarchy because instead of appointing, somebody who is religiously quote unquote worthy, he
Hmm.
appoints his son Yazid as his heir.
Or even, perhaps administratively competent. Go
Yeah,
for the
I
sun.
mean, that's sort of the question that is going on. The question that's being formed here is like, is the caliphate more a political institution or more a religious institution? Like, is it more
Hmm.
important that I'm a pious man to be caliph, or is it more important that I know how to handle an empire? Because nobody's done this before, so they need to figure it out. And Muawiyah's position is, I think it's probably best that somebody knows how to competently handle an empire. Even if they're not the most pious man around, we can have someone else for that role. And so eventually, when he dies, his son Yazid will be the caliph. And though there will be one more civil war, the second fitna going on, eventually the Umayyads, the members of this family, will have a dynastic succession in the caliphate, which will not really keep into account all, for example, the descendants of Ali, who will again be part of the Shia group, who don't recognize all these extra caliphs. They say they're just kings. What is the difference between them and a religious figure? They're just kings. And they say, no, no, actually, us who are literally descended from the Prophet, we are more legitimate and we should follow the descendants of Ali, who was the only legitimate caliph, and everyone else actually just stole the position one way or another.
Mm.
And yeah, that's how we get roughly. And then thousands of years in the way, we eventually get to the modern day where we don't really have a caliph anymore, but that's what you get after the end of World War One.
Gotcha. Yeah. Huh. That's quite a ride.
Yeah, and I was curious to see, why do you think that, for example, the papacy didn't take some sort of dynastic route? So, for example, in the Tusculan papacy, I'm
Hmm.
thinking about pontifex. So
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
these different families. Why didn't it just become, oh no, it has to be a crescentii that's always a pope, and that's how it is forever and ever.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, you were starting to see things along those lines, right? There is a, fairly complete and fairly involved, papal family tree, right? When we're talking about like the Tusculan papacy,
Yeah.
kind of in many ways mirroring the family tree of the Dukes of Tusculum for some spooky reason. So
Yes.
like you said, it's relatively a close run thing, potentially there. But I think in the case of the papacy, um, because it had had sort of that time, and obviously, this is a guess, and you can run any what ifs you like, but
Mhm.
going back to sort of like that, not having a flourishing power center, kind of for the early stages, right? The first, few centuries of the church,
Yeah.
there was always that precedent to point back to of like, look, the early popes were not like a family. And like, if a family tried to tie in, they would always be undercut by, well, yeah, but that's not the way that this was when this all started. Right. And, I think it's the case, in both of these religions, like, where it all started is sort of the most impactful tradition, right? You try and show that
Yeah,
you're
of course.
in accord with the Bible or in accord with the Quran. in accord with Muhammad, in accord with Jesus and Peter. So
Hmm.
I think they, if they had gotten into that pattern, and really they kind of did, like you said, like that's a great example. Um,
Yeah.
but the way out was always going to be there because it would always be seen as a corruption unless they like fundamentally re-edit history, and by that point, well, the
Yeah.
the texts of scripture were largely agreed upon. I
Yeah.
mean,
It had been a
whether or
while.
not you're covering certain books of the Old Testament is not going to be as relevant as the New Testament which was very firmly established um,
Sure.
by that point,
Yeah.
when things
Uh,
kind of started potentially going off in a family way, as it were.
yeah. As an interesting counter to that, I was just thinking right now about Henry VIII making himself head of the
Mm.
church, which is an interesting parallel, where it's just turning. Oh, the Pope is now the King of England, and this
Yeah.
is how we're doing things now,
Well, and
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 that's held up well enough.
well, and what's interesting there is, the concept of the emperor, right? That
Hmm.
was something that had just about as much prestige, or really as much prestige and more, depending on where you lived, right? As the concept of the papacy itself, right, and of the
Yeah.
bishops, like Christianity and the empire, like very much went hand in hand for a while, but they went their separate ways, right?
Hmm.
And I guess a while is actually kind of a stretch of how long those actively cooperated, but yeah, they would get back together and make nice, right?
Yeah, that's
But
right.
that split of sort of like the secular authority, especially like the super prestige of the emperor, and just that idea, that
Hmm.
Henry VIII was an emperor, but that anointed monarchy. I think that was at a higher level in Europe,
Yeah.
thanks to the way it played out in Imperial Rome. And so it did have that almost equivalence with the religious power, which is weird to think about because you think about the Middle Ages as like a time when the popes always came out on top. It really
Hmm.
wasn't always the case. Like there were times when the emperors could dominate the popes,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
not in everyone's opinion, right? Like the church folks are going to tend to say, well, obviously the pope's still on top, but from a practical perspective, who are the armies following? Well,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
it's
Who could
not
just march
not
on
really
Rome?
going to just
Yeah.
automatically go to the pope.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, and then the other thing is there's a tradition. Let me quickly just reconfirm this on my
Hmm.
end, but there is like a branch of apostolic Christianity in India. It's the I think it's Syro Malankara.
Okay.
It's the Syro Malankara Church,
Hmm.
and they actually did end up in like a family tradition of basically they would have their leaders, right? The leaders of the community um, would come from a specific family for their kind of legitimacy, and oftentimes, like they would have um, direct descendants, right? Like father to son, because celibacy, kind of the further east you go, the less it is a
Yeah.
deal. So yeah, so the Syro Malankara Church, which is also has the Syro Malankara Catholic Church in particular, is of interest to me, right? With my sort of mandate of hey, if you
Yeah.
say the Pope's in charge of your religion, then you fall under the broad
Fair.
Catholic umbrella. So that's where I'm focusing on. But yes, they did end up sort of with that family dynastic version. So there's actually a cardinal that is from that broad family, like
Oh,
right
that's pretty
now.
cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. So he'll be voting in the
So we're
conclave.
we're going to see him as Pope, I'm sure, next in a couple weeks, and
Yeah, yeah, and then he will impose that on the Catholic Church as a whole.
that
Um,
I mean that would be really fun to see. But hey,
that's Basileus Cardinal Clemus. He's the
okay.
Catholicos of the major archdiocese of Trivandrum in Kerala, which is basically the heartland of Christianity in India, with the
Are
Thomas
these?
Christians.
Yeah, these are the St. Thomas Christians, right?
Yes, yes,
So.
they kind of ended up in two different rites and two different subgroups, the Syro Malankara and the Syro
Hmm.
Malambara, because at least my impression is, it's partially because one side had this sort of family um, influencing things, and the other side, kind of was not so much on that. And obviously, there's more points to these different traditions, but that was something that kind of surprised me to learn about.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a really interesting version. Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, but yeah, anything else you want to touch base on?
No, not especially. Just looking forward to the conclave.
Yeah, yeah. So have you? I don't know how much you've kind of seen or heard different things, but do you have any cardinals that you've been watching?
I just like Tagle. He
Okay,
seems
yeah,
nice. That
yeah,
that is my very basic reply. I think most
that's
people
fair.
are. I've also just been looking up on the Papability Index just to see
Yeah,
names that I don't recognize. And it's like, oh yeah, there's like a Canadian guy there, and there's
yeah,
others. I'll have to
yeah,
up
yeah.
on that.
Gabe,
Yeah.
Gabe, Gabe does good work. Some of his scoring is especially interesting because it like pops up, names that you're not seeing elsewhere, which is not
Yeah.
a critique. Like, I mean, he's definitely kind of done his research and
No, no.
knows his onions. But yeah, I mean, we will see. I
Yeah, I
know
would like
Tagle is a breeze bet, so I think I could spoil
that's
that.
fair. I
But
would
yeah,
like Pizza Balla as well, just for name. But
yeah,
also,
yeah.
also, also, just be nice to have an Italian pope. It's been a while.
Yes,
We're
yes. Well,
feeling sad
that's
and left out.
That's certainly what has me thinking more along the lines of someone like Cardinal Paroline or
Ah, yeah.
actually Cardinal Zuppi,
I don't know
who's
Soupy
actually
as well
he's
as Caroline, but
specifically
yeah.
Rome-born,
Oh, damn.
and yeah, I mean Paroline is definitely the bigger name, right? Paroline was the one that I thought going in was going to be the
Mhm.
guy, but he hasn't really been making much of a splash in like the it's like kind of the pre-conclave gatherings,
Yeah, yeah.
and so like to be fully up at front of things, especially if you're kind of looked at as Francis 2.0, like
Mhm.
not making a splash is kind of not filling those shoes, because that's something that we sort of associate with Pope Francis of like you're going to know what he's up to.
Yeah, fair. And I was wondering, do you have any bets on regnal names?
Well, to be clear, I don't have any formal bets on
No, no,
anything.
of course.
Um, but I mean, if we get someone who's planning to position themselves as Francis's successor, I think Francis II would definitely be
Ooh, alright.
pretty natural, and very on the nose.
Yes.
If you had someone that wanted to kind of, it's also worth noting that Francis actually kind of teed that up. He's the first pope in history to assign himself a regnal number of one, when he
Oh, was
listed
it? Oh, I
himself as
didn't know
Pope
that.
Francis the First.
I thought
Yes.
also John Paul the First did that.
Nope.
Or
Nope.
oh, no
He
way.
he
Okay.
at least, yeah, from what I understand, like he did not throw the first after him. He was just Pope John Paul.
Hmm.
And very quickly, but after his lifetime, became Pope John Paul the First,
Yeah, yeah, of
for
course.
record keeping. But yeah, Francis already like sort of anticipated that, like he would sign his documents as uh,
Okay.
Francis the First.
That's
So
pretty
we'll see if a Pope Francis the Second pops up as
yeah,
sort of a
exactly.
cue from that. I think that's most likely.
Yeah. In my head, I'm seeing John Paul the Third as a less controversial option.
Yeah, I think you could see that. I'm also thinking John the 24th, specifically,
Ooh, another
as
John.
like a
Okay.
nod to the council, the Second Vatican Council, and that
Oh,
would
alright.
definitely be from
Okay.
someone along the lines of wanting to continue Pope Francis's legacy, but perhaps not wanting to be so on the nose about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Um,
actually an interesting one. I hadn't thought of that.
yeah, yeah, and then on the perhaps if we're prognosticating, just if you hear the name, what you might tend to think about that from a church history perspective, like if you get like a Clement or a Leo or a Pius, that would be coded as more of a conservative name at this point.
Yeah.
Whereas just to throw out
I
another name, Paul would be one that perhaps moderate, or perhaps more on the that council side again, since Pope Paul VI
yeah.
was the one that closed the council, but is also the one that wrote, Humanae Vitae, kind of ruling out uh, contraception by and
Oh,
large for
right.
Catholics. So that's why I'm thinking, sort of like if you see a Paul, I would feel that that's sort of coded in two directions.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you could also look at just like the original Paul. That's
Yes.
also, the more quote unquote progressive version compared to Peter. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know though. There's
I,
some. There's some.
I guess it depends. It's difficult to put something on left-right axis if you're
Yeah,
2,000
especially
years ago
especially
and
if we're going back to the
a
apostles,
guy.
because like
Yeah.
Paul on women, especially some of the letters that, well, not to get too political about the New Testament, but the letters that are of perhaps more debated origin are not what I would call progressive
Okay.
across the
For
board.
some reason I remembered the other way around, but
Yeah.
that's my misty memory.
Oh, well, I mean, I've got misty memory par excellence, so it's fine. Generally speaking, I think there is obviously, the echo back to the OG of the name. But
Yeah.
oftentimes when folks are looking to like, what does this name mean? It's usually more about a signal to the more recent successors carrying that
Yeah.
name.
Yeah, I mean, when you were mentioning Pius, I'm mostly thinking about the young Pope for that, Pius the
Yes,
13th, which is like, oh
yes,
dear.
they absolutely use that as a coding for, this is going to be a conservative one, right? Because that's what he was in that, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't watch that. I merely edited it.
Oh, right. Okay. Fine.
I've seen clips, but yeah.
I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But yes, Michael would be an interesting one, specifically because of that, recent anti-pope. Now, I don't think he's,
Oh,
a
right.
global name, but Pontifex listeners will know that they interviewed, a
Yeah.
real life anti-pope. And then they had the J.D. Vance effect, and you can cut that out if you want, or you can keep it in. But yeah, he died like immediately after the interview, basically, before I had a chance to edit it. So it really made me feel like I had dragged my editing time out so long that the interviewee died in the process. But actually, it was interesting, with that, because we were like, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and release that as is, because he's not going to be able to look at the edit, right? Apart from just a brief note.
Fair.
Like, yeah, so this is what happened.
Yeah, it makes sense. That would be a deep cut on behalf of a cardinal to.
Yeah, and he had already said like, hey, I'm fine with the this going out.
Okay,
so
fair.
We did have
That's
that.
good.
Yeah, ethically covered. But yeah, all right, cool. Well, thank you so much, Umberto. Thank you for your
thank you as well.
today.
It's been a nice chat to have.
Yeah, and we'll figure out how to get this edited in some fashion.
We'll find a way. Yes, one way or the other.
All right.